I am Scott Crawford. Many students ask, what are we supposed to call you? I actually prefer to go by Scott. So a few things about me. I have a wife and 4 kids. 2 of my kids are going to Blinn and the other 2 are in high school. My wife's hobby is going canoeing and outdoorsy stuff. My hobby is more like Brandon Sanderson books and the Marvel movies and playing board games. One of my hobbies is writing murder mystery parties. My kids love playing Minecraft, which it's like 10 years old now, but somehow that's still one of the things they really love. I did serve a church mission in Brazil for 2 years. I have a very amazing cat. There's also 2 dogs. But welcome to Categorical Statistics. Either 459, which is an undergraduate class, or the 659, which could be graduate online or the graduate in person. All 3 sections are kind of together in the same Canvas block, so welcome to class. Here's what the class looks like in Canvas, except I'm probably going to put this video here on the main homepage so you can see that. Of interest should be this Zoom, so classes will be available on Zoom for all the sections. Oh, and I don't have the meetings. Hang on. Check that out, the power of pausing the recording. So here you can see for the 25th, you could click here and join class. If you're in class, I don't mind if you use the Zoom option if you would like that. If you are online and you would like to come to class, you are also welcome to. There's always plenty of seats. There are some days the class is canceled. September 1st is Labor Day. October 13th is, they call it Fall Harvest, I think this is what that is called. October 24th is also missing. Can we go forward to where October 24th should have been and it's not? I need to visit a satellite campus of A&M, and they asked me to come on that Friday, and I was like, but I teach, and they were like, please come anyway, so be aware of that. I'll send out reminders when we get there. November 26th, 28th, that's Thanksgiving, so here's all the different class days and how you get to Zoom. After we have class, because it will be recorded, then you can come here and you'll see the class recording here. If you click on it and it says you don't have permissions, it's about how you're logging in. So you can just shoot me an email and I will tell you, you basically need to go to, you got to go to Zoom, tamu.zoom.us, and that will help you to get there. But I can send you a PDF that tells you about that if you have that problem. Here's where we have the assignments, including, for example, our first assignment, which I don't expect that you could, well, you can't get there now because Canvas won't let you get in ahead of time, right? So if I click on it, it'll say class has not started yet. Oh, I guess I get kudos because I'm the teacher, so I get to go in and do the assignment. You do get 3 attempts. If you had the intro class with me, then you know that WebAssign would let you submit each question. That's not the way Canvas is programmed. Canvas, you have to do the whole assignment and then you submit it. It is nicer than having a TA grade it because you get an instant feedback on what was right and wrong. And then if you want to redo the assignment, you have to pull up a whole blank assignment. So what a lot of students will do is they'll have one tab where they can see the assignment they got before, so they know what answers were right or wrong, and then they'll pull up a new tab to start a new version of the assignment. What do we have? Some questions are like pull down, multiple choice. Some questions are just plain, straight up multiple choice. Some questions have numerical, fill in the answer, and some of them are, let's do this program, and we are using R for this class, so do it in R and see what graph you get, and you should be able to get a graph that matches these. But in a normal assignment, it would be like, do the graph. But now, because it's computerized, right, so we're doing multiple choice, which of these graphs should match the one that you just made? More multiple choice, fill in the blank. How many questions for assignment 1? It's all the way down to 42 different questions, but the first assignment also isn't due until, no, I have it written right here. Well, does it say at the top when it's due? Nope, there is no knowing when this is, there is a way to know. There's got to be a way to know. The assignment is due August 29th. Okay, so there is 29th. Okay, so that's after a week. So we're going to have a lot to cover before we get there. So the first few days of class are going to be hitting a lot of topics. What topics? Let's click on the home. I have this, which I made for my own help, but I think I've discovered that this is actually nice for students to have as well. So these are my notes that I use to go through what do we need in homework 1. We got to talk about these definitions. We got to go through just a little bit of theory, and we got to talk about the different ways to do these tests. So yeah, day 1, day 2, day 3, right? We're going to cover all of these. And you might be thinking, what does a categorical talk about? Well, you've probably seen models that had categorical variables, plus beta 1, and then you would have, you know, a couple with zeros and ones, and maybe you would have lots of beta 2, category 2, and another category 3. But this y that we're predicting, it would have been numerical in most of your classes. Now, a lot of classes would have covered a few different topics that might qualify under the categorical umbrella. Common would be testing proportions, which was probably in your intro stat class. For a lot of you, that's going to be stat 211. For some of the master students, you might have had something else. Maybe you've seen chi-square tests, and yes, we're going to cover those. But once we talk about our response variable not being numerical, but instead being categorical, sometimes this kind of modeling thing that you would have done in a regression or a linear models class, it doesn't work that way. It's not quite as simple. Like, let's say the y variable is, let's do race. And so we have Black, Latino, I don't know how many races on up here. The Census Bureau, by the way, actually has this problem because you can put on the census, I prefer not to say my race, but they can't just actually leave it blank. So what they have to do is try to predict what they think your race would be based off your other answers. You can imagine why this is a big deal, right? Imagine a community where 70% says they're Caucasian and the other 30% says I prefer not to say. If those who prefer not to say are a minority, and that's why they prefer not to say, like if you're trying to do a good census, you need to be able to figure that out and tease that information out of the data set. So if we have these races, then this equation doesn't make sense. Like, what are you values? When it was numerical, we could add or subtract values to get a numerical thing, but suddenly this isn't what makes sense anymore. And that's a lot of what the categorical class is going to be about, is how can we make this make sense? And your first obvious suggestion is going to be just use numbers for the categories. There are situations where that can. Here's my number line with yes and no, and there's infinitely many numbers that exist on this number line between any two given points. So usually we use the numbers 0 and 1, and this leads us to the testing of proportions, which was the first thing that I even mentioned here. Sure, that works, and now we can use some of the numerical methods, but what happens if you land here, like it's between 0 and 1? Okay, are we just talking about maybe the proportion that land in each of these? Maybe we could make a fence and say if you land on this side of the fence, we're going to predict a no. But do you want to move the fence? Maybe the fence should be closer to here and everything on this side is predicted no. So these are all subtle questions that affect the way that we look at proportions. And if you're thinking, isn't there just one way to handle proportions? Oh no, my friend, you are wrong. If I pull up R and I ask it to give me a binomial confidence interval with 8 out of 50 as my proportion, look, there's 11 different methods. This, by the way, is probably what you learned in the intro class as that proportions confidence interval. But this guy down here actually matches the proportion hypothesis test that you actually learned in the intro class. And my guess is the intro class did not explain that you were doing different things with those two methods, but there's all these. We're not going to talk about all of them, but we will. Let's see, aggressive-cool, asymptotic, yes, Bayes. Bayes, we'll talk about it, but not actually calculate it. We'll skip this one. Exact we'll do. We'll skip low probe it. We will talk about likelihood ratio test. We'll do this one, we'll do that one. So we will be doing some of these methods. The idea is, after you see so many different ideas and how each one takes a slightly different tweak on how to handle the proportions. Some of them work well if you have specific weird situations. Some of them are kind of hacks, but they actually work really well. So people are like, yeah, let's keep that method. Can't explain why it works so well, but it just seems to. Some of them have theoretical underpinnings, but they're more work, and some of them are actually really easy even if they're less accurate. So yes, we'll be talking about all those different kinds of methods. But going back here to our example, you can't just always use the numbers because, for example, when we talked about races, white, Latino. Now hold on, if you're going to put one of the races here in the middle, that would suggest that it is equally distant from this race as from that race, but twice as distant from that. Like, that doesn't even make sense. No, we can't use methods like that with some of this data. So we're going to talk about different ways to look at it. In fact, if we go back to the example where we had the 0, you could also start to ask questions like, what happens if it lands over there? Oh, we're going to restrict our model so that's not possible. But sometimes there are ways it could happen. Like, what if instead of proportions, we're talking about odds ratios and things like that? So plenty of different things to talk about. No matter how much statistics you've already had, when you mess with a categorical response variable, things feel just a little different. And by having a whole class dedicated to that, you get really good at how do I look at things differently and how do I handle that. So it's an exciting class. I look forward to seeing you, and I will see you on the first day of class.